Greetings. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about building a book of shadows. I did a video just last summer, not last summer, a year ago, in 2020, August of 2020, called The Witch's Book of Shadows, because I wanted to sort of clarify some things about a book of shadows. And in that video, I will link that below. In that video, I showed for I don't know how many times, maybe the third or fourth time at least, that I've showed a book which is entitled Grimoire of the Green Witch, which I just showed it because I was talking a little bit about, first of all, what is the difference perhaps between a book of shadows and a grimoire. They seem to be used interchangeably, but to me they're really not the same thing. And it's pretty much just recently that I've come to understand what the difference is. And to me, at least to me. And one of the differences, of course, is the fact that a grimoire is something that has a lot of information, which is exactly what that book has. If you want to see the link below, I can show you. You'll see the book, and then maybe you can acquire a copy of it. It's a really good book if you're looking for a good book. It's one book that I do recommend to people, particularly in the beginning of their practice. I don't recommend books very often, so that's something that I do recommend, because it has so much information in it. As a matter of fact, it has so much information in it that I don't really have it used. Most of the information, and I forget it's even in there. Every time I get the book out to recommend it, I look through it and I go, oh yeah, this has really good information about fill in the blank that I didn't ever look at. But it is wonderful if you really want a book that packs a lot of punch. But it has all kinds of things in there. It has reference information on herbs and crystals and even tarot cards. But it also has sample rituals. So if you're somebody who wants to be doing a ritual and you don't know how to do a ritual because you've never been to a ritual, maybe, it gives you a good example of how to do a ritual. And it's really good to have. But when I'm talking about a book of shadows, I'm talking about something as compared to a grimoire. When I refer to a book of shadows, I refer to something like this. This is something I've showed you. You've seen this. We have this numerous times. That this is the book of shadows is personal to my husband and to me. It does have some things in there, some rituals and some information and some spells and all kinds of information in it, but it is personal to only my husband and I. We do not share this information. We would never publish this book. This book I've known even share with my coven, because my coven has our own book of shadows that we do only with the coven. My husband and I do not use that book of shadows in our own private practice. We only use that for ritual and for other things within the coven. It is secret to that. The book of shadows is secret to our coven. This book of shadows is secret to my husband and to myself. The Grimoire of the Green Witch that is published by, I think it's written by Anne Mora. It's public. You can buy it on Amazon. It has wonderful, some of the information is the same. But this is particular to me. And this is what I want to address today, this one. Because, now I'm not going to really share it with you, but you can see I've got post-its sticking out. I've got ribbons, and I've showed you that in the past. This is a book that my husband actually made. It is leather bound, and he has sewed it and bound it. And we've been using this for years and years and years. The problem with it is, for me though, the reason I really want to bring this up to talk to you now, particularly I'm talking to you now if you don't have a book of shadows and you're wanting to make a book of shadows, it's to you that I'm really speaking to you, because where this was a wonderful idea when we used it, a lot of this book of shadows we don't really, it's not relative to us today. There are things in here, and I mentioned this in the other video, that are from when we used to hold ritual, just the two of us privately, before we ever attended any with public rituals or of course, certainly long before we ever attended any rituals with anyone else, and certainly before our coven. So when we hold rituals now, we really don't, not to say we could not, but these are really specific to those times. But there's a lot of other things within this Book of Shadows that is very important to me. For instance, I have a lot of recipes for oils, or I have my recipes, the recipes that I use for different herbal blends. But it also has a lot of spells. It has a lot of spells in here that I have used, but I don't put them, I tend to not put them in the book until I've used them, and if I got a good result from them, then they go in the book. That's what I kind of want to say about it is, it should be something, because just like you can start collecting all kinds of, if you watch my last video, of things that you can collect for your cupboard, just like you can collect a lot of, you can end up with a lot of paraphernalia for your cupboard if you're not discerning in what you keep and what you acquire in the first place. Your Book of Shadows can fill up with a lot of stuff that is not meaningful to you or to your practice. So I recommend to everybody, however you do it, to don't put things into your book until you have used them and you like them. Like for instance, if it's a spell and you have written the spell, write out the spell on some other form. And perform it. And if you like it, if you enjoy doing it, or you thought you got a good income, or it had great potential for you to do it again, then include that in your Book of Shadows. The same with anything. The same with if you made a witch's oil, if you made a road opener oil, for instance, and you decide, oh, I want to try it. Here I found somebody used fill in the blank ingredient in their road opener oil. And I have to make a new batch of road opener oil. I'm going to try this using this ingredients and see how I feel about the oil. So make up the oil, write down what you did, and then see what kind of effect you like. Do you like it? Do you like using it? Do you think it had a good effect for you? If it did, if it's a keeper, that's a keeper. Well, I like that change. Add that to your Book of Shadows. Okay? It's just kind of like the same thing as a cook. If I want to try out somebody's recipe, I try it out first, and then I change what I want to change. And if I find, oh, this is a recipe I want to make again, then it gets a permanent home in one of my, one of my books, my personal cookbooks, my personal recipe books. If it's something I don't want to make again, I don't want to waste the space in my recipe book, do I? It's the same thing with the Book of Shadows. You want to be very discerning about what goes in it and what does not go in it. Okay, but the biggest thing I want to say about it is, and this is something that affects even me, somebody who's practicing witchcraft for quite a while. If I want to find something, oh man, and it's in here, I have to tell you, half the time I have spent going page by page by page by page, looking for what I'm looking for. Even though I have done lots of tricks, which I pointed out in my last video, of using colored ink for certain things. I have these fancy ribbons, satin ribbons that I use for placeholders in here. I also use the non-fancy Post-its that I use for placeholders in here. Even though I do those tricks, I still don't have a it's not satisfactory. I still have so much trouble organizing it. Now, I remember, and I think I mentioned in the last video, but I'll say it here again, that a long time ago here on YouTube, when there was a pretty cohesive witch community, pretty active here on YouTube, where we used to kind of communicate with each other a good bit. There was a lot of sharing of Book of Shadows, and people had ideas, and and you can see Book of Shadows on Pinterest, etc. You can see, and a lot of people were trying to cut through and be more practical with the beautiful sample pages that we could see on Etsy or Pinterest or whatever. that look wonderful, look like what everybody thinks in that Book of Shadows page should look like. But they were trying to cut through that and try to make it more practical. That they were printing those pages or printing pages like that on a computer, on a page, and then putting it in like a 3-ring binder so they could section things off, etc. in their book. And while that appeals to a lot of people, that kind of thing just doesn't really appeal to me because I find that too controlling almost. Where I think, being a witch is messy. It's messy. Our hands are dirty. Our altar cloths have wax all over them. It kind of smells. Sometimes it smells wonderful in here. Sometimes it smells really pretty crappy, depending on what I'm burning in here, right? It's a mess. I have, I've got stuff everywhere. I've got herb bits everywhere, and that's just part of being a witch. It's just it's messy. So I don't expect my Book of Shadows to be all tidy and neat. But at the same time, I have to be able to use it. I have to be able to use it. So I want to say, number one, this is something that I'm learning. That as much as I'm attached to this, I'm so attached to this, I love this. I don't think it should be my only Book of Shadows. I think in order for somebody who is as active as I am and does as many things within the practice, my witch practice, I think I need more than one book. I need something that's, for instance, what about my herbs? I use herbs for a lot of things. I use herbs for spells. I use herbs for incense, and of course I use herbs for in tonics or things that I might take in tinctures, internally. And it's very important, especially when you're going to include things that you're going to take internally, that you're very specific about what the information about the herbs that you've acquired. So it doesn't really help me to have these herbs tucked, like here I have some in the very beginning of this book. Herbs that I thought, and I was very careful about what I included in here. I'm trying to find it. See, now even when I look through it, I have trouble finding information. Those pages with the herbs. You see the trouble that I'm having? Here I have some things about incenses, and I have some information about things like mugwort, for as far as why I would include mugwort in my Samhain incense blend, the reason for it. Okay, the reason why I would be including things like chamomile. Why would I put chamomile in a Mabon incense blend? Okay, so some of those things, it's helpful, but that's not the only thing I use chamomile for. That's not the only thing I use mugwort for. Okay, so I really need to have a book that's more organized by just maybe an herbal book, a book just on herbs. And if I was going to do that at this point, I might use something like I use for my bullet journal. It doesn't have to be, the bullet journals that I use most often are these ones that have, I've showed you images in the past of my journal, but they have dots. What do you call them? Dots. It's dot grid. So that you can make straight lines, or you can write straight if you want to, but they're not lined. I believe you can get them lined, but I have one in another room that I'm using for planning my my book project that I got accidentally. That's why I'm using it for the book project, but it doesn't have any lines at all in it. It has a little lined guide that you can put behind a page and you can write straight. But I really don't like it because I can't really use it for drawing and things like that, which I do put images and stuff in my books. But I thought something like that might be real interesting. It's more like a sketchbook, and they do come in different sizes. That I could not only include information about the herb and things I use it for, but I could also maybe have a little sketch of the herb itself, or I can do like what I do here and print images off. I do this all the time in these books. Print images or whatever off of the internet, and then I glue them in. using a glue stick, simple glue stick, and I glue them into my book. Okay, I do that all the time. I do images all the time in my book. Okay, every book I've had, and they stay really lovely. And so that would be good. Here's my forecast for the year 2020 in my trail spread. So that might be an idea that I might want to consider doing, getting just one book like this to use in conjunction with my Book of Shadows that is only for herbs. And if that were the case, if that was what I was going to do, I would try to divide them up. I don't know that if it's realistic to make it alphabetical, because, you know, what if you all of a sudden start, you know, like rosemary, I use rosemary, some things that start with an R, but what if all of a sudden I start using rue? Because rue is something I used to use, and I stopped using rue, and now I went back and I'm contemplating using rue sometimes. I think I used to use it because I used to have it in my yard, but I don't have that plant anymore, so I don't use it. But I know a lot of people like it. Okay, would I include a space for rue in my book or not? I don't want to waste space and just leave, because that's one thing I've learned from using these bullet journals. The whole idea is you just keep going from where you are, go to the next, go to the next. But also, like rosemary, what if I wanted to include rosemary in a spell? Would the spell go in this book, in that book with the rosemary, or would the spell go in yet another bullet journal kind of book, bound book like this, so to speak, another kind of journal, maybe even a line journal that has just about spells or tinctures? Like it would be more like a recipe book, because it is recipe for spells, or it is recipes for tinctures, or recipes for oils, those kind of things. So I can have the information in one book and the uses of it in another book. You know, that's possible, except the fact is the information then book in the first, in the herbal in the first place, becomes more like something I would find out of a grimoire, with additions like maybe what I found it useful for. And that's the stickler, isn't it? Because sometimes people will say, I want to do a spell on, let's see, something, if I can find something, for instance, here's a good one. A spell to find lost items I found in my Book of Shadows, and it recommends. And as a matter of fact, I did it this way using honeysuckle oil, which is supposed to be really good for this kind of a thing. And I used honeysuckle oil and I thought that was very satisfactory. And then I went to go and do this again, and I couldn't find honeysuckle oil. I didn't have any honeysuckle oil. I could not make honeysuckle oil because my honeysuckle was not in bloom, and it takes a couple, to make a nice potent honeysuckle oil, you have to steep the honeysuckle in the oil, and then you drain it, and you take out that honeysuckle, and then you use the honeysuckle oil itself to steep new honeysuckle in. You make it more and more like it would be like a homemade essential oil. It's not really exactly the same thing, but it's close. It gives you a nice, really potent honeysuckle oil. You do that a couple times, and then you get a really strong, good honeysuckle oil. Okay. I didn't have it. I didn't have time to make it, and I couldn't locate it when I tried to buy it. Every time I tried to buy it, it was not coming up. It was not, I don't know if it's just so hard to buy or what it was, or maybe I found it and it was so outrageously expensive, I said, forget it, I'm not buying it. So what am I going to use instead? Okay, so then I would say in that case, what would my recipe be? My recipe should not be under honeysuckle oil or honeysuckle. It should be under, this spell should have its own, what did I use in its place? Organization is really key. Organization is key. So I suggest to you that you take some time and say, if you're just going to make a spell book, if it's just going to be a spell book, if you're not going to worry about rituals, or you're only going to include spells and recipes, because you're not going to have bother with a whole lot of herbs, maybe you can get away with one book. You don't have to have a separate herbal book, because in herbal book you can find that recipe, the ideas for what herbs are good for, in lots of places, like in the grimoire that I mentioned, but also from the internet, you know, from videos like mine or other books, or you can just do basic Google searches of your own by saying magical properties of, you know, dragon's blood, magical properties of dragon's blood, magical properties of chamomile, magical properties of amethyst, magical properties of fill in the blank. Okay, and then you give it a try, and if it works for you, then you can put that entry in your book. But think, the only reason for I'm bringing this up today is think very carefully of what you need. What are your needs? Okay, what are your needs? If you're not going to be using, like I said, if you're not going to be using 30 gemstones, but you're only going to use a couple, and you want them for particular items, you don't have to have a whole section devoted to gemstones. You can just use the gemstones in you know, within your spell, like you say, within the spell. You need to have, like, what did I just say? I just had a couple here. I think this one had, I closed my book. Here's another spell. Boy, I lost a lot of things, because this one here's a whole different spell about finding an item that is lost. And this one does not use any oil. I love this spell. This is one I use for handkerchiefs. I use a handkerchief to find things. But I use caraway seed. I use caraway seed and rosemary in this spell. So, see, there's a whole other spell. So maybe my answer should be, maybe your Book of Shadows should be really those secret recipes that you use. As you collect spells, as you collect recipes for black cat oil, or, you know, witch's salt, or tincture for whatever reason, or, you know, those kind of things. Collect recipes, like a recipe book for your witch activities in your Book of Shadows, and leave the other things out of it. Leave all the stuff about the herbs out of it, because that will happen as a result of your herbs. I mean, of your spell book. If you're going to be using rosemary in a lot of your spells, you're going to be using rosemary because you have access to rosemary. Okay, does that make sense? What I'm trying to say is, I want you to simplify. I don't want you to follow what somebody else does. I want you to follow an organizing system that works for you. But I want you to establish from the very beginning as much organization as you can. Just think it. Doesn't mean you can't change it later. Like, I've changed my mind a million times. And this was wonderful for what I used it for. But I believe it is time for me to take some of these things out of here. And, here I found pages using cat whiskers magically, or using cat claw magically, cat fur magically. It's all about cats. Okay. There's another page that's all about things that are good to use for prosperity or abundance. These are entries that are wonderful to have, perhaps, in my recipe book, for my witch recipe book. Okay. So anyway, I feel like I'm kind of rambling, but it's because my mind is kind of rambling, because this is something that I have had an issue with. I've come up with stumbling blocks. I am not going to go page by page through this Book of Shadows to find something that I need. Okay. So perhaps you need, if you're going to include, you know, the last video, I think last week the video went up about what do you really need in your cupboard. I addressed the idea of what kind of a witch are you? if you do spells, if you do, you know, rituals, you're going to need different things. And that is going to be very important to know before you start building the Book of Shadows. Don't just look for beautiful pages. You can make things as beautiful as you want to do later, you know, but don't worry about it too much. Try using the items first. Try the spells first before you commit to putting them in writing in your Book of Shadows. That's, I think, the bottom line. Okay? Try it out first. If it backfired and you didn't like it, or you burned it, you made a blend for incense for Yule. Oh, this is going to be wonderful for Yule incense. And you made that, and it smelled horrible, or it burned out too fast, or you couldn't keep it burning, or it smoked all over the house. Would you want to record that and use it again? No, you don't. No, you don't. Try it out first, and you find you really like it. Then put it in your book. Oh, if we could all be so wise. I say that because if I was so wise, I wouldn't have gotten where I am now. With all this mess, I get myself into this cluttered mess. Witchcraft is messy. It's going to be messy. But we can clean it up. We can clean it up a little bit. We can clean it up a little bit so it's a little more useful. Okay, I don't want to talk and tongue about this, but I really recommend take some time and look at my video, which is Book of Shadows from last August, and also look and see, make a list of what it is your goals are as a witch. What do you want? What do you need? What are your needs? And then from there, we'll start to organize it. I'll put up some videos in the future if I go ahead and start up just a book for my receipts or my recipes or whatever, or however I do it, however I solve my problem. I will be sure to share with you, and then you can learn from my mistakes or learn from my successes as well. Okay, that's all. That's all. I am the Good Wife. I am Rebecca. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, I wish you blessings.